Poor hero, committing suicide for a ration of soup. In our thoughts, we were murdering him. Stretched out by the cauldron, he was now trying to raise himself up to the edge. Either from weakness or fear, he stayed there, trying, no doubt, to muster up the last of his strength. At last he succeeded in hoisting himself onto the edge of the pot. For a moment he seemed to be looking at himself, seeking his ghost-like reflection in the soup. Then, for no apparent reason, he let out a terrible cry, a rattle such as I had never heard before, and his mouth opened, thrust his head toward the still steaming liquid. We jumped at the explosion, falling back onto the ground, his face stained with soup. The man writhed for a few seconds at the foot of the cauldron. Then he moved no more. Then we began to hear airplanes. Almost at once the barracks began to shake. "They're bombing Buna," someone shouted. I thought of my father, but I was glad all the same. To see the whole works go up in fire. What revenge! We had heard so much about the defeat of the German troops on various fronts, but we did not know how much to believe. This, today, was real. We were not afraid, and yet, if a bomb had fallen on the blocks, it alone would have claimed hundreds of victims in the spot. But we were no longer afraid of death, at any rate not of that death. Every bomb that exploded filled us with joy and gave us new confidence in life. The raid lasted over an hour. If it could have only lasted 10 times 10 hours. Then silence fell once more. The last sound of an American plane was lost in the wind, and we found ourselves back again in the cemetery. A great trail of black smoke was rising up on the horizon. The sirens began to wail once more. It was the end of the alert. Everyone came out of the blocks. We filled our lungs with fire and smoke-laden air, and our eyes shone with hope. A bomb had fallen in the middle of the camp, near the assembly point, but it had not gone off. We had to take it outside the camp. The head of the camp, accompanied by his assistant and the chief capo, made a tour of inspection along the paths. The raid had left traces of terror on his face. Right in the middle of the camp lay a body of a man with the soup-stained face, the only victim. The cauldrons were taken back to the kitchen. The SS had gone back to their lookout posts, behind their machine guns. Their interlude was over. At the end of an hour, we saw the units come back, in step as usual. Joyfully, I caught sight of my father. "Several buildings have been flattened right out," he said, "but the warehouse hasn't suffered." In the afternoon, we went cheerfully to clear away the ruins. A week later, on the way back from work, we noticed in the center of the camp, at the assembly place, a black gallows. We were told that soup would not be distributed until after roll call. This took longer than usual. The orders were given in a sharper manner than in other days, and in the air there were strange undertones. "Bare your heads," yelled the head of the camp suddenly. 10,000 caps were simultaneously removed. "Cover your heads." 10,000 caps went back onto their skulls as quick as lightning. The gate to the camp opened. An SS section appeared and surrounded us. One SS at every 3 paces. On the lookout towers, the machine guns were trained on the assembly place. "They fear trouble," whispered Juliet. 2 SS men had gone to the cells. They came back with the condemned man between them. He was a youth from Warsaw. He had 3 years of concentration camp life behind him. He was a strong, well-built boy, a giant in comparison with me. His back to the gallows, his face turned toward his judge, who was the head of the camp. The boy was pale, but seemed more moved than afraid. His manacled hands did not tremble. His eyes gazed coldly at the hundreds of SS guards, the thousands of prisoners who surrounded him. The head of the camp began to read his verdict, hammering out each phrase. "In the name of Himmler, prisoner number, stole during the alert, according to the law, paragraph, prisoner number, is condemned to death. May this be a warning, an example to all prisoners." No one moved. I could hear my heart beating. The thousands who had died daily at Auschwitz and Birkenau in the crematory ovens no longer troubled me. But this one, leaning against the gallows, he overwhelmed me. "Do you think the ceremony will be over soon? I'm hungry," whispered Juliet. At a sign from the head of the camp, the lager capo advanced towards the condemned man. 2 prisoners held him in his task for 2 plates of soup. The capo wanted to bandage the victim's eyes, but he refused. After a long moment of waiting, the executioner put the rope round his neck. He was on the point of motioning to his assistants to draw the chair away from the prisoner's feet when the latter cried in a calm, strong voice, "Long live liberty! A curse upon Germany! A curse! The executioners had completed their task. A command cleft the air like a sword. "Bare your heads." 10,000 prisoners paid their last respects. Cover your heads. Then the whole camp, block after block, had to march past the hanged man, stare at the dimmed eyes, the lolling tongue of death. The capos in the head of each block forced everyone to look him full in the face. After the march, we were given permission to return to the blocks for our meals. I remember that I found the soup excellent that evening. I witnessed other hangings. I never saw a single victim weep. For a long time, those dried-up bodies had forgotten the bitter taste of tears. Except once. The Oberkapo of the 52nd Cable Unit was a Dutchman, a giant well over 6 feet. 700 prisoners worked under his orders, and they all loved him like a brother. No one had received a blow at his hands, nor an insult from his lips. He had a young boy under him, a Papel, as they were called, a child with a refined and beautiful face, unheard of in this camp. At Buna, the Papel were loathed. They were often crueler than adults. I once saw one of 13 beating his father because the latter had not made his bed properly. The old man was crying softly while the boy shouted, "If you do not stop crying at once, I shan't bring you any more bread. Do you understand?" But the Dutchman's little servant was loved by all. He had the face of a sad angel. One day, the electric power station at Buna was blown up. The Gestapo, summoned to the spot, suspected sabotage. They found a trail. It eventually led to the Dutch Oberkapo. And there, after the search, they found the important stock of arms. The Oberkapo was arrested immediately. He was tortured for a period of weeks, but in vain. He would not give a single name. He was transferred to Auschwitz. We never heard of him again. But his little servant had been left behind in the camp in prison. Also put to torture, he too would not speak. Then the SS sentenced him to death with 2 other prisoners who had been discovered with arms. One day when we came back from work, we saw 3 gallows rearing up in the assembly place, 3 black crowns. Roll call. SS all round us, machine guns trained, the traditional ceremony. 3 victims in chains, and one of them, the little servant, the sad-eyed angel. The SS seemed more preoccupied, more disturbed than usual. To hang a young boy in front of thousands of spectators was no light matter. The head of the camp read the verdict. All eyes were on the child. He was lividly pale, almost calm, biting his lips. The gallows threw its shadow over him. This time the Lagerkapo refused to act as an executioner. 3 SS replaced him. The 3 victims mounted together onto the chairs. The 3 next were placed at the same moment within the nooses. "Long live liberty," cried the 2 adults. But the child was silent. "Where is God? Where is he?" someone behind me asked. At a sign from the head of the camp, the 3 chairs were tipped over. Total silence throughout the camp. On the horizon, the sun was setting. "Bury your heads," yelled the head of the camp. His voice was precocious. We were weeping. "Cover your heads." Then the march past begun. The 2 adults were no longer alive. Their tongues hung swollen, blue-tinged. But the 3rd rope was still moving. Being so light, the child was still alive. For more than half an hour he stayed there, struggling between life and death, dying in slow agony under our eyes, and we had to look him full in the face. He was still alive when I passed in front of him. His tongue was red. His eyes were not yet glazed. Behind me I heard the same man asking, "Where is God now?" And I heard a voice within me answer, "Where is he? Here he is. He is hanging here on the gallows." That night the soup tasted of corpses.